When we planned this trip, none of us imagined how deeply it would change everything. 7 friends, myself, Emily, Josh, Michael, Anna, Sarah, and David, chose a path that led us into the heart of Chernobyl's exclusion zone. For most of us, it was supposed to be just an adventure, a thrill, a chance to experience the haunting silence of a place where time had stopped and nature had begun reclaiming what man had stolen. But what we found there defies all explanation. At first, it was nothing more than a bold trip, though we knew the zone didn't forgive carelessness. We had read stories from old locals, heard rumors of strange disappearances and eerie events. But to us, they were merely legends. Myths meant to scare and thrill. We arrived in Kiev from various parts of the US, students, photographers, bloggers, adventurers. Each of us was prepared in our own way, but none of us were truly ready for what awaited us. Our first day in the Ukrainian capital was exhausting, adjusting to time zones, organizing our gear, and meeting our guide, Serhiy. He was a quiet man in his 40s, with piercing eyes that seemed to see through you. Serhiy warned us not to let our guard down. The zone isn't just land. It's alive. It remembers. It punishes those who disturb its silence. We laughed. I laughed the loudest. What could possibly be scarier than crumbling buildings and abandoned cities? Traveling into the zone felt like entering another world. The roads grew worse, the air heavier, as if something unseen was sucking the life out of it. The sun, which had been blazing overhead an hour ago, dulled strangely, and the sky itself felt denser. Our first camp was in a ghost village where time had been frozen for decades. Crumbled houses, shattered windows, empty streets, the landscape reeked of abandonment. The first evening was defined by silence, an oppressive quiet so deep it seemed to swallow us whole. A silence in which the wind's whispers could be heard, but not footsteps. Yet among that silence, we began hearing something else, faint sounds, like whispering voices. Calling. But no words were clear. We tried to ignore them, blaming fatigue or nerves. But then, things began disappearing, Anna's backpack, Josh's camera, and it became clear we weren't alone. The following days brought deeper nightmares. The dark corridors of decaying buildings held something unseen. We saw shadows move, but whenever we tried to focus, they were gone. Our cameras caught flickers of light, our recorders captured unsettling noises, half human, half beast. And then people began vanishing. At first, it seemed accidental. But then Josh was gone. Then Michael. Then Anna. None of them came back. It was no longer an accident. They hadn't wandered off. Something in the zone was watching us, hunting us. I'm keeping this record for anyone who dares listen. For anyone who wants the truth. For those brave enough to peer into darkness. Because what happened to us isn't just a story about missing people. It's a story about how the line between life and death, dream and nightmare, in the zone, is perilously thin. Sometimes I wonder if we ever left. If we're just shadows, wandering between worlds. And that the zone, it's still waiting. Waiting for the next ones. Hi. My name is Sarah Blake. I'm the only one who came back from that trip. There were 7 of us, a group of friends from the States obsessed with urban exploration and abandoned places. For us, the trip to Chernobyl was meant to be a challenge, an adventure, a chance to touch the mysterious. But let me be honest with you, I wish we had never gone. Our journey began in late August. We flew into Kiev, then took a chartered van straight to the exclusion zone. We'd been preparing for months, maps, gear, Geiger counters, a guide experienced in breaching restricted areas. But in the end, we decided to go off the grid. Through contacts online, we got an unofficial route. One that would take us deeper than where tourists or even stalkers usually go. To places long forgotten by man. Our group included, me, Sarah, a photographer and documentarian. Josh, my boyfriend, filming everything with a GoPro. Alyssa, a medic, Josh's younger sister. Kevin, a programmer, our technical brain. Dave, Kevin's friend, fascinated by the history of the disaster. Rachel, an actress, planning to make a YouTube series about the zone. Thomas, quiet, but experienced, a stalker we met through online forums. The first 2 days went exactly as planned. We moved through what's known as the Green Corridor, bypassed old checkpoints, and reached the outskirts of Pripyat. We were filming, laughing, marveling at the eerie beauty of the decaying buildings. Some of us started noticing strange things, sudden Geiger counter spikes in supposedly clean areas, shuffling noises in sealed rooms, cameras draining faster than normal. On the third night, we decided to spend the night in one of the high-rise buildings on the city's edge. Inside was a strangely preserved apartment, furniture intact, toys left scattered on the floor, a yellowed newspaper on the table dated April 25, 1986. That night, Rachel said she heard a child's laughter coming from the neighboring flat. Kevin tossed and turned in his sleep, crying out from some nightmare. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of someone flicking the hallway light switch on and off. But when I checked, there was no one there. On the fourth day, we ventured farther, to a village called Krasna, a place you won't find in any tourist maps or official guides. That's where everything started to go wrong. The village looked frozen in time. Houses slouched under the weight of moss and vines. Trees had grown into the walls. Near an abandoned school, we found children's notebooks, but inside were not Ukrainian texts. They were written in what looked like corrupted Latin, stained with what appeared to be rust or blood. Thomas suggested we spend the night there. The place felt unnervingly still. That night, we were woken by a piercing whistle, like someone forcing air through a narrow pipe with inhuman strength. Josh grabbed his camera, but the battery was completely dead. We heard footsteps running across the roof. Alyssa burst into tears, she swore she saw a child's face in the window. A face with empty eye sockets. After that night, Thomas changed. He barely spoke, walked at the back of the group, constantly glancing over his shoulder, muttering to himself. The next evening, we returned to the school to retrieve some gear we had left behind. That's when Thomas vanished. We heard him scream from the basement. When we rushed down, there was no one. Only a charred notebook lay on the floor. Its cover had a carved route of our path. And a symbol of an eye etched into it. We tried calling for help, but there was no signal. We decided to turn back, but it was already too late. The following days dissolved into a waking nightmare. People vanished. Strange shadows lurked in the corners of abandoned hallways. And then, the dream started. Each of us saw the same thing, a black lake. A towering figure standing at its edge. Wearing a gas mask. Whispering in a language no one understood. One by one, we began to lose each other. But what happened next, that's a whole other story. This was only the beginning of the end. When we left the dosimetric control zone and entered the true silence of the exclusion zone, everything felt thrillingly dangerous, but still under control. There were 7 of us, Jason, me, Amber, Luke, Kelly, Mark, Tracy, and Zach. We all knew what we were doing, we had proper equipment, mapped routes, and a hired guide. We planned to spend the first night in Pripyat, in one of the high-rise buildings. That's when things began to subtly shift. Tracy mentioned she had a dream where someone whispered her name from inside the closet. Jason said he heard footsteps in the hallway, even though we all slept in the same room with the door nailed shut. His GoPro helmet camera was mysteriously turned on by morning, though no one had touched it. The footage only showed strange clicks, shadows, and that same whisper, in a language we couldn't understand. The next day, we pushed deeper into the zone, toward Chernobyl, too, where the remnants of the Duga radar loomed over the forest like rusted ribs of an extinct beast. At one point, Kelly, who had been walking at the back, simply vanished. She was just there, then, silence. We searched for an hour. Jason found her map, torn, the edges charred as if burnt, though there was no smell of smoke. No signs of struggle. Only a faint metallic scent in the air. That evening at camp, Zach acted strangely. He sat motionless, staring into the night through the broken window. When I asked what was wrong, he said, "They were here. They see us." Later, we found a phrase scribbled over and over in his notebook: "Don't go north. Don't follow the voice." On the third day, Mark insisted on exploring a kindergarten in Pripyat. He'd heard stories about toys that move. When we arrived, dolls with hollow eyes were lined up in a row inside. Someone or something had arranged them. This wasn't there 2 days ago. The dolls seemed to turn their heads, or so we thought. That night, Luke woke up screaming. He claimed a child with black eyes had been staring at him from the window. In the morning, we found tiny barefoot footprints on the windowsill, ending at the basement door. Jason's camera was running again. On the recording, a strange noise, creaking, something crawling in the dark, and ragged breathing just off-screen. The next day, Zach vanished. We heard his screams echoing from deep in the woods, but we couldn't find him. Only his camera remained. The footage was shaky, and then, a clear moment, Zach looked into the lens and said, "This isn't the land of the dead. This is their center. They won't let us leave." I started to panic. My friends were disappearing one by one. We tried to leave, but compasses failed. The GPS showed only one point, local point, 0. Jason said he heard Kelly calling from an abandoned sanatorium. He went to check. He never came back. I was left with Luke. We decided to wait until morning and head out blindly. But that night, he too disappeared. Only his jacket remained on the bed. The window was locked from the inside. Alone. I walked to the road. My camera recorded the path, until everything turned white. White noise. Then a whisper, "You were never meant to come." I woke up 10 kilometers outside the zone, in the forest. No food, no water, my phone drained. In the hospital, they said hunters found me. I told the police everything. They labeled me unstable. None of my friends were ever found. No record of our permit to enter the zone exists. The archive, erased. The police, silent. But I know the truth. Something is there. And it doesn't like being disturbed. Amy and I sat in one of the rare cafes in Slavutic. She looked exhausted, almost ghostly. After everything we'd been through, returning to normalcy felt impossible. But she was stubborn. "We have to find out what this was. Why it pulled us in. And what happened to the others." We started by returning to Slavutic, the most convenient access point to the exclusion zone. There, in the local library, we found an elderly woman, Marina Oleksievna. She had worked as an archivist since Soviet times. Her eyes had dulled with age, but the word Chernobyl clearly meant something far deeper to her than just the name of a nuclear station. "You're not the first ones looking for answers," she said when we showed her the map and told her about the building where we had stayed. She went down to her basement and, after a long search, brought back old, dusty folders. The archives, dated from the 1980s, contained mentions of Object K-17, an abandoned military experimental block, allegedly located in the very area where we had spent the night. It was said to be part of a classified study on the effects of radiation on human psychology. Some of the reports were censored. Others, missing. But that wasn't the most terrifying part. The reports mentioned strange psychological changes in the soldiers, night screams, delusions, riots. One document included the interrogation transcript of a soldier who believed that something from the shadows walks between buildings and steals others' voices. We also found another woman, Katerina Vasilievna, a 92-year-old resident of the village of Lelev. She lived just a few kilometers from the house we stayed in. She told us that even before the reactor explosion, children had gone missing in the forest near that area. Search efforts were in vain. One time, her brother, a hunter, brought back a child's shoe tangled with knotted string. After that, he never spoke again. "They opened something there," she whispered. Not for us. Not for humans. Another archive, discovered digitally through an old stalker internet forum, led us to documents from a Kiev-based research institute. In 1991, the institute had hurriedly destroyed several reports on anomalous effects in the zone. One report mentioned the phenomenon of voice echoes in the stillness, recorded on tape, voices of those who were long dead. We also stumbled upon a video from 1994. It had been shot by a German journalist at an abandoned base not far from our house. In the dark footage, a child's laughter could be heard, though no figures were visible. At the 34-second mark, the camera captured a shadow moving against the direction of light. A week later, the journalist went missing. Even more terrifying was learning that Ukrainian police had never officially opened cases regarding disappearances like that of our group. In an internal system, we found a designation, CH47/VN, which we suspected referred to our case. But all related reports had been removed. The officers who had handled them were either gone or refused to speak. Some things are better left buried, one former operative told us. This wasn't just a legend. It was something alive, something preserved in the shadows of Pripyat, and whether by accident or design, we had touched it. We didn't know how deep the story went. But we knew it wasn't over. And that's what kept Amy up at night, sitting in front of her laptop, rewatching the footage where the voice of her missing friend Ben whispered, "He's still here." The clock on the wall of the abandoned building read 2:17 a.m. Layla sat by a broken window, clutching a shard of glass that reflected the faint light from her headlamp. Her eyes stared blankly into the darkness outside. A howling wind stirred dust and mold in the air, and only one sound echoed in her mind, a clicking, metallic and steady. Every 8 seconds. She had been counting. It had continued ever since the last member of their group disappeared. Night watch. The last person Layla saw alive was Zach. He insisted on checking out one more building further down the street. He said he'd heard screams or something like them. The camera on his shoulder was still transmitting, though the feed had grown choppy and distorted, as if someone were deliberately tampering with the signal. Then, the camera caught something strange, a gray, blurred figure passed briefly in the frame, like a silhouette. After that, the image vanished. The connection was lost. Layla and Joe followed. The building was empty. On the floor were remnants of old photographs. One stunned her deeply. On the yellowed paper was an image of a group that looked eerily like theirs, 7 people, same poses, same backpacks, even similar clothing. But the photo was dated 1991. They returned to the same school where they'd stayed overnight. But Joe was no longer himself. He was silent, staring into the void. At night he sat facing the door, clutching a knife he'd found in the fire station. Eventually, he began repeating, "We've been here. We were here. And we're still here." As if trapped in a loop. The next morning, he was gone. Layla found only the knife and a tour guide's business card marked with a black symbol. Wandering through the administrative wing near the old hospital, she discovered an archive room no one had entered in years. There, beneath layers of dust and cobwebs, lay tapes labeled, Project X Sector. Access denied. One of the videos showed bizarre experiments on groups of people. Some had strange symbols on their foreheads, others had unnaturally black eyes. At the end of the tape, the camera panned to a city street where a woman in a gas mask dissolved into the air before the lens. The appearance of the black silhouette. With each passing hour, the presence of something in the city grew more tangible. At first, Layla only heard sounds, a whisper, as if calling her name. Then she began seeing shadows. One time, while trying to record the sound on a tape recorder, a whisper evolved into a scream on playback. That night she was awoken by a crash. At the entrance stood a tall silhouette, seemingly made of shadow and smoke. It simply stared. The next morning, written in the dust on the floor, were words in English, "Go back. You're not ready. Return to Pripyat." Leaving her shelter behind, Layla decided to make her way to Pripyat. She had the feeling this was the center of everything. The city seemed dead, but something pulsed underneath. In the main square, she encountered a woman in a torn medical coat. The woman held an old Soviet flashlight and said, "You brought the voice." When Layla asked what she meant, the woman vanished, and a symbol appeared on the pavement, an inverted number 3 inside a circle. Interference by unknown forces. As she tried to reach the observation tower, 2 men in black approached her. No insignias, military gear without identification. They said, "You've seen too much." Layla managed to escape, hiding in the basements. But she knew for certain now, they wouldn't let her go. The mirror signal. The final mystery was a signal she received on an old field radio. That same clicking, every 8 seconds. Then, her own voice, recorded days earlier but now distorted, as if she were warning herself, "Don't go further. We're trapped. The circle can't be broken." When she finally left the city, she was picked up several days later by emergency responders. They found her on an old road, 30 kilometers outside the zone. She had no memory of how she'd gotten there. But she had her camera. And on it, the last frame, a group selfie of 7 people standing in a forest, a radiation sign behind them. But 5 of the faces were blurred, as if they had been erased. Snow began to fall gently from the sky, covering the tracks we had left behind, as if the place itself was trying to erase us from its memory. I was alone, or at least, I couldn't see anyone else from the group. Out of 7, only I remained. I walked through the broken corridors of what had once been a dormitory for technicians. My flashlight trembled in my hand, the battery nearly dead. But the worst part was the silence. Deafening, crushing, deep, at times interrupted by footsteps that weren't mine. I had strange visions, people flickering at the edge of my sight, a ringing like a school bell, and a scraping sound as if something heavy was being dragged across metal. And every time I thought this was the end, a new fragment of horror emerged. In the basement of one of the buildings, I found a room covered in old reactor maps, ciphers, and Russian phrases scrawled across the walls. In the center of the room was a video projector that switched on by itself. On the screen, footage from 1986. But among the workers were faces I recognized. Josh, Michael, even Anna. They were there, among the staff. In old uniforms. How was that possible? The camera zoomed in, and they stared directly into it. Directly at me. I recoiled, hitting the wall. The projector exploded in sparks. In the documents, I found references to Project Omega. A secret Soviet program, experiments with psychotropic fields, involving military personnel and prisoners. In the Chernobyl archives, they discovered something they couldn't explain. Something that wasn't supposed to exist in our world. It had no physical form but could influence the mind. Hallucinations, identity disorders, split personalities, disappearances, it had all been recorded since 1987. 2 years later, the archive was suddenly closed, and the documents removed. But someone had managed to make copies. One of the old workers, whom I found in the village of Kupovataiki, showed me his room, piled with newspapers, diagrams, journals. He knew what had happened there. He knew that someone, or something, was controlling the place, like a sentient consciousness that remained as an energy field. Sometimes benevolent, sometimes cruel, but always foreign. He said that those who entered the field could split. Loss of identity, repetition of past events, a reversal in the flow of time. I realized, Chernobyl wasn't just a disaster. It was an attempt to contain something worse. The explosion wasn't an accident. They were trying to destroy what they couldn't control. They found me a week later, wandering near Ivankiv. I didn't remember how I got out. A GoPro video was found in a stash, damaged, but the last frame was of my eyes, staring into the darkness, and a voice, not mine, saying, "She is already inside." After they found me wandering near Ivankiv, I was taken to a hospital where I spent several weeks. My mind was shattered into pieces, I could barely speak, and the memories of that night in the abandoned house slowly began to replace reality. The doctors called it post-traumatic stress disorder, but I knew it was something far worse. What I experienced couldn't be explained by science. It felt like some other entity had invaded my mind, a dark echo from the past that changed me forever. When I returned home, the world felt different. People around me stayed silent about my trip, as if they had agreed to never mention the exclusion zone. Journalists who tried to investigate our group either suddenly disappeared or received serious threats. The authorities officially buried the story. My name and those of my friends gradually vanished from all databases and archives, and the missing person cases were closed without explanation. One evening, as I sat in a dark room, my eyes landed on an old laptop I had hidden before the trip. On it was the GoPro footage, the final recording from our night in the house. I forced myself to watch it. The video was dark and grainy, with strange whispers and raspy sounds like the cries of wild animals. Suddenly, the camera turned toward me, but it wasn't me. The figure on the screen was distorted, its eyes empty, lifeless. The voice that spoke wasn't mine, but I heard it clearly in my head, "She's already inside." Since then, I haven't felt alone in my own body. Sometimes, in the mirror, I see not myself, but a foreign shadow. At night, I'm haunted by nightmares in which the house comes alive, the walls breathe, and the doors open on their own, inviting me back inside. In my dreams, I see my friends, the ones who are gone, and they beg me to return. I tried to find answers, spoke to locals, former zone workers, researchers, but they all said the same thing: that place has a life of its own. It has swallowed many souls and it's not done yet. The archives I managed to access held terrifying secrets. Stories of experiments conducted in underground labs beneath Chernobyl, clandestine research into phenomena beyond understanding, attempts by scientists to control or destroy something unknown that was born there. Many documents were damaged, destroyed, or hidden, but they all hinted at one thing: in the zone, something exists that defies all explanation. And now I live with the knowledge that the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone is not just a radioactive wasteland. It is something alive, waiting for new victims, new souls. I feel the darkness creeping toward me, voices from the past whispering in my ear, inviting me back. Did I really escape? Or did I simply become part of an eternal loop of horror? And what will happen to those who dare enter those abandoned houses? I don't know. And maybe it's better that way. But let this be a warning: don't go there. Because Chernobyl never forgets. And it waits.